The most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates until it is too late. That line right there is already circling back to you, not out loud, not publicly, quietly, in whispers. Because the latest word going around about you is not about how loud you are or how flashy you move. It is about how sharp you are, how controlled you are, and how nobody can quite figure you out anymore. You are not making noise. You are making people uncomfortable. And that is always the first sign they have realized something important. Think about it like this. A loud engine warns everyone it is coming. A silent electric car does not. People step into the street without thinking until it is right there. That is how your intelligence works. It does not announce itself. It does not brag. It does not rush. It just moves. And by the time people notice, the situation has already shifted in your favor. That is when the energy changes. That is when the whispers start. Here is a fact most people do not like hearing. Studies in behavioral psychology show that people fear what they cannot predict more than what they cannot control. Loud confidence feels manageable. Obvious intelligence feels measurable. But quiet, adaptive intelligence that messes with people's sense of safety. When someone cannot read your next move, they stop relaxing around you. They start watching, calculating, replaying past moments in their head, wondering what they missed, and that is exactly what is happening now. You may have noticed it. Conversations pause when you enter the room. People choose their words more carefully around you. Jokes do not land the same way anymore. Someone who used to talk over you now suddenly listens. Someone who underestimated you now pretends they always knew. That is not coincidence. That is realization catching up. What is funny is you did not suddenly become intelligent. You always were. The difference is the universe put you in situations where your mind had to show itself. Pressure reveals patterns. Chaos exposes thinkers. While others reacted emotionally, you observed. While others rushed, you waited. While others tried to dominate, you adapted. And now people are connecting dots they should have connected earlier. Before we go further, pause for a second. Thank you, chosen one, for being here. And do not forget to pay this message back by simply pressing like and subscribe. Not for ego, not for numbers, but to help spread this message to more minds that need it. It is a responsibility to share clarity when the universe puts it in front of you. Thank you for being part of this force. Now let us get back to it. Here is the part nobody says out loud. The whispers about you are not admiration. They are warnings. Not because you are dangerous in a reckless way, but because you are dangerous in a strategic way. You do not explode. You do not react. You do not telegraph your intentions. You observe long enough to understand the entire board before you touch a single piece. That makes people nervous because it removes their advantage. There is a reason chess masters do not rush moves. Speed looks impressive, but patience wins games. You have become that kind of presence. Someone whose silence carries weight, someone whose calm feels loaded, someone who does not need to threaten because people already feel the shift when you are involved. People are starting to say things like, "Be careful with them," or "They are sharper than they look," or the half-joking line that always gives it away. Yeah, do not try that with them. Those are not compliments. Those are boundary markers. That is people quietly admitting they cannot manipulate you the way they do others. And here is another uncomfortable fact. Highly intelligent people are often recognized late, not early. Not because they hide, but because they do not perform intelligence for approval. They do not flex. They do not correct everyone. They let outcomes speak. By the time others realize what happened, the result is already locked in. That is why the whispers come after the impact. You handled something others could not. You saw through something others missed. You stayed calm where others panicked. You did not take bait. You did not fall for the obvious setup. And now, people are replaying those moments in their head like security footage, realizing you were several steps ahead the entire time. This is where the dynamic changes. When people think they understand you, they relax. When they realize they do not, they adapt. Some will respect you more. Some will fear you quietly. Some will test you just to confirm their suspicion. And some will back away without ever explaining why. That is not your problem. That is the cost of being mentally unplayable. The latest whisper about you is not that you are lucky. It is not that you are gifted. It is that you are dangerous in the only way that actually matters. You think clearly under pressure. You see patterns early. You do not give emotional access to people who have not earned it. And you do not need validation to move with confidence. You did not become someone to fear. You became someone impossible to fool. And that realization, it is spreading quietly, uncomfortably, exactly how real intelligence always does. And before we move any further, pause with me for a moment. If you are still here, it is not by accident. People with shallow thinking usually click away fast. This message keeps pulling the ones who sense there is more going on beneath the surface. The same quiet intelligence people are whispering about in you is the reason you are still listening right now. You do not chase noise. You follow patterns. You stay when something feels precise. So here is my ask, chosen one. If this message is already hitting a little too close, tap like and subscribe. Not for hype, not for ego. Do it so this reaches other minds who are being underestimated right now. That is how signals spread, quietly, effectively. If you want to mark yourself as someone who is ready to step fully into this level of awareness, drop 777 in the comments. Not as a ritual, as a signal. A way of saying, I see it now. And if you feel called to support the work behind this message with super thanks, know this. It is not about the amount. It is about momentum. Every bit keeps this signal alive and moving forward. That is how influence really works. Now, take a breath. We are about to break this down step by step. And if you are truly as intelligent as they are starting to whisper, you will feel the pull to stay until the end. Let us get into it. Number 1, you do not walk straight. You circle the entire board and own it. They lose the moment they assume you think like them. That is the mistake they keep making over and over. They expect you to move in straight lines because that is how their minds work. Problem, reaction, response, cause, effect, noise, simple, predictable, weak. You do not operate on that level, and that is exactly why the whispers about you have turned sharp lately. You do not chase answers. You dissect structures. You do not jump. You map. And that difference is what makes them nervous. Here is what the enemy does not understand yet, and it eats at them quietly. You do not respond to what happens. You respond to why it happened, how it connects, and what it unlocks next. While they are arguing over the surface, you are already underneath the floorboards, counting support beams. That is not overthinking. That is systems thinking. And people who live off shortcuts hate people who see the whole machine. You pause before acting, and they mistake that pause for hesitation. That is their first error. You are not frozen. You are running simulations. You are watching how one move branches into 5 outcomes. You are deciding which version of the future benefits you most. By the time they feel confident enough to make noise, you have already made the decision internally. When you finally move, it feels sudden to them, to you. It feels inevitable. This is where the intimidation starts. People are comfortable with fast thinkers they can read. Quick reactions, loud opinions, predictable emotions. Those people are easy to bait and easy to steer. But you do not bite. You do not rush to explain yourself. You do not give emotional reactions on demand. That silence of yours is not empty. It is loaded, and deep down they feel it. Think of it like this. Most people play checkers. You are playing chess, not flashy chess. Slow, patient, positional chess. You do not care about winning small arguments or momentary validation. You care about endgames. You let them feel smart early because you know the board tightens later. That is why people who try to outmaneuver you end up confused. They think they are ahead until suddenly they realize there are no safe moves left. At this point, a question might be creeping into your mind. Why does this make people act weird around me? Why do they suddenly change tone, hesitate, or over-explain themselves? Here is the answer. When people realize you do not think linearly, they realize they cannot control the narrative with you. You are not reacting to what they say, you are reacting to what their behavior reveals. You notice inconsistencies. You remember patterns. You connect dots across time. That makes manipulators panic, because manipulation only works on people who think moment to moment. There is a psychological fact worth knowing here. Humans feel the most threatened, not by intelligence itself, but by intelligence they cannot model. If they cannot predict your response, they cannot plan around you. If they cannot plan around you, they lose leverage. That is when respect turns into caution, and caution turns into whispers. They start testing you. Small comments, subtle jabs, fake confidence. They are fishing for reactions. They want proof that you are just like them. Emotional, impulsive, easy to steer, but you do not give them that satisfaction. You respond later, or not at all, or in a way that makes them rethink the entire interaction. That is when it clicks for them. This person is not playing the same game, and here is the part that hits the enemy hardest. You do not need to dominate conversations to dominate outcomes. You let others talk. You let them reveal their thinking, their fears, their habits. Every word they spill is data to you. While they think they are winning socially, you are learning strategically. By the time they realize what you have gathered, it is too late to take it back. You have probably noticed this pattern in your life. People underestimate you early. They relax, they overshare. They assume you are passive or distracted. Then something shifts. You make one move, say one sentence, or set one boundary, and suddenly the entire dynamic changes. They did not see it coming because they were watching the wrong thing. They were watching speed. You were watching structure. That is why the whispers about you are no longer playful. They are cautious. People do not say they are smart anymore. They say, be careful. That is a downgrade in comfort and an upgrade in awareness. They have realized you are not someone to rush, corner, or pressure. You do not react well to force, because force is not how you operate. You operate through leverage. Another question you might be asking is this: why do I feel isolated when I think this way? Because most people do not want to slow down enough to think structurally. Straight-line thinkers want quick wins and clear labels. You do not give them that. Your mind moves in loops, layers, and long arcs. You see how today connects to next month, how one choice reshapes a relationship, How one reaction changes power, that depth creates distance. Not because you are above others, but because you are operating on a different timeline. And make no mistake, the enemy feels this distance too. They sense that you are not fully accessible, not emotionally, not mentally, not strategically. They cannot pull you into chaos on demand. They cannot rush your decisions. They cannot pressure you into mistakes. That is why they either back off or try harder. Both reactions are proof you are doing something right. Here is the brutal truth they will not admit. You make them feel exposed. Your way of thinking highlights how reactive, scattered, and surface level their own minds are. And instead of rising to your level, most people would rather label you as too quiet, too serious, or hard to read. Those labels are not criticisms, they are defenses. You are not confusing, you are complex. You are not slow, you are deliberate. You are not detached, you are strategic. And the more you lean into this way of thinking, the louder the whispers get. Because once people realize you do not move in straight lines, they realize something else too. You cannot be played with the usual tricks. You do not fall for emotional bait. You do not chase approval. You do not reveal your full hand just to make others comfortable. You do not walk the path they expect. You circle the board, remove their options, and move only when the outcome is already decided. That is not arrogance. That is intelligence with discipline, and that is exactly why the latest whisper about you is not admiration anymore. It is caution. Number 2, you do not ask questions. You let people expose themselves. The smartest hunter never chases. They let the target walk into the trap on its own. This is where the whispers about you turn serious, because people are starting to notice something they cannot quite explain. You do not chase information the way others do. You do not interrogate. You do not pry. You do not push for answers. And yet somehow you always seem to know enough. Too much. Enough to move correctly. Enough to stay ahead. Enough to make people wonder how you saw it coming. Here is the part that hits the enemy hardest. You do not collect facts like trophies. You extract meaning like a surgeon. While others are busy asking questions, you are listening to what slips out when no one thinks it matters. And most people leak information constantly. They just do not realize it. Imagine this. 2 people walk into a room. One starts talking immediately, filling the space, asking questions, trying to sound informed. The other stays quiet, relaxed, present. Who do you think people end up revealing more to? The quiet one. Because silence creates space, and space makes people uncomfortable. When people feel uncomfortable, they talk, and when they talk, they show you everything. People do not hide the truth. They leak it in pieces when they feel safe. You understand this instinctively. You do not rush conversations. You let them breathe. You notice tone changes. You catch the hesitation before a sentence. You hear what is emphasized, what is skipped, what is laughed off too quickly. While others are focused on what is being said, you are tracking why it is being said that way. This is why being around you feels unsettling to some people. Not because you are threatening, not because you dominate, but because you absorb. You remember, you connect, and people sense, on a gut level, that nothing around you is wasted. Imagine someone playing poker who keeps glancing at their chips every time they are bluffing. Most players miss it. You do not. Or imagine someone telling a story and changing one small detail each time they repeat it. Others brush it off. You log it. Or imagine a person who suddenly becomes overly friendly when a certain topic comes up. You do not enjoy the friendliness. You question the timing. Intelligence is not about knowing more facts. It is about noticing patterns other people ignore. At this point, a question might surface in your mind. Why do people overshare with me? Why do they say things around me they later regret? Because you do not demand information. You create an environment where it flows. You do not judge quickly. You do not react emotionally. You do not interrupt to show how smart you are. That makes people feel safe. And when people feel safe, they reveal their real thoughts, their real motives, their real intentions. That is where your power quietly builds. Most people think intelligence looks like talking, explaining, correcting, showing credentials. But real intelligence often looks like listening without reacting, because reactions warn people. Silence disarms them. You let them keep talking while they think they are in control. Meanwhile, you are assembling the puzzle. By the time they realize what they gave away, you have already seen the full picture. This is also why people start guarding themselves around you after a while. You may notice conversations become shorter. People become more careful with their words. They start asking you questions instead of answering yours. That shift does not happen randomly. It happens when they realize you see more than you say. Imagine this. Someone tries to test you with a casual lie, nothing major, just a small twist of truth. They expect you to miss it or challenge it immediately. You do neither. You acknowledge it calmly and move on. Weeks later, when the lie collapses under its own weight, they suddenly understand something chilling. You knew the whole time, and you did not need to call it out to win. That is when respect turns into fear. Another question you might be asking is this: why does this make people uneasy instead of impressed? Because information is power, and power that does not announce itself feels dangerous. When someone knows you are smart, they feel challenged. When someone suspects you know more than you should, they feel exposed. And exposure triggers defense mechanisms, jokes, distance, passive aggression, sudden politeness. You have seen it all. They do not fear what you know. They fear that you did not have to ask. You extract information without effort because your mind is tuned to signals, not noise. You do not get distracted by volume. You do not confuse confidence with truth. You do not assume honesty just because someone sounds convincing. You track consistency over time. You compare words to actions. You notice when someone's behavior changes under pressure. Imagine this. A person smiles and agrees in public, but hesitates privately. Another speaks confidently, but avoids specifics. Another floods you with details to bury something important. These tactics work on people who listen for content. You listen for intention. That is the difference. And here is the brutal truth. The enemy does not want to face. Once you have extracted enough information, you do not need to confront. You do not need to accuse. You do not need to expose. You simply adjust your position. You stop trusting where trust is not earned. You stop investing where returns are fake. You move differently. And that silent shift often hurts more than confrontation ever could. This is why the whispers about you include phrases like, "Be careful what you say around them," or "They pick up on everything," or "They always know." Those are not exaggerations. Those are delayed realizations. You do not read minds, you read patterns, and patterns never lie. There is something else worth saying here. You are not doing this to control people. You are doing it to protect yourself. You have learned, consciously or not, that clarity is safety, that understanding motives early prevents damage later, that listening saves you from chaos. While others stumble through emotional landmines, you step around them because you saw them planted weeks ago. That is why your intelligence feels dangerous, not because you attack, but because you avoid traps before they close. Not because you dominate, but because you do not get cornered. Not because you seek power, but because you do not give it away blindly. If you have ever wondered why people suddenly change their behavior after spending time with you, this is why. They sense you saw something real, and whether they respect you for it or resent you for it depends on their intentions. Honest people feel understood, dishonest people feel exposed, and the universe has a funny way of amplifying this trait in you right now. Situations are lining up that reward observation over reaction, silence over noise, precision over speed. That is not random. That is alignment with who you already are. The latest whisper about you is not that you are curious. It is that you are perceptive. Not that you ask the right questions, but that you do not need to. You let people show you exactly who they are, and you believe them the first time. That is why they are careful now. That is why they pause. That is why they choose their words, because deep down they know something they cannot unlearn. You do not chase information, you extract it. And once you do, the game is already over. Number 3, you do not raise your voice. You drain their argument dry. You already lost the moment you thought this was a debate. This is where people really start to panic around you, because you do not argue like they do. You do not jump in to dominate. You do not interrupt to score points. You do not try to win the room. That alone throws them off balance. They come in ready for noise, and you give them silence. They come in ready for combat, and you give them clarity. And suddenly, their whole strategy collapses. Here is the part they do not expect. You are not arguing to win. You are listening to understand the structure of their thinking while they are focused on defending their position. You are mapping how they arrived there. You let them speak. You let them explain. You let them repeat themselves, and every repetition tightens the noose, because weak logic always exposes itself when it is forced to stand on its own. I do not need to beat you. I just need to hear you long enough. You ask questions that sound harmless, almost curious, not aggressive, not confrontational, simple clarifications. What do you mean by that? How did you reach that conclusion? Can you explain that part again? And that is when it starts unraveling. Not because you attacked, but because they cannot support their own claims when the noise is stripped away. Imagine this. Someone walks in swinging opinions like a hammer, loud and confident. You do not block the swing. You step aside. They hit nothing but air. Or imagine a magician repeating a trick until you ask them to slow down. Suddenly, the illusion disappears. That is what you do in conversations. You slow them down just enough for reality to show itself. At this point, a question might be forming in your mind. Why do people leave conversations with me feeling uncomfortable even when I stayed calm? Because calm is threatening when it is paired with attention. You do not argue emotionally. You do not get defensive. You do not try to be liked. That makes people feel seen in a way they did not consent to. They realize you were not reacting. You were observing. And observation feels invasive to people who rely on performance. When someone cannot provoke you, they lose control of the exchange. You have probably noticed this shift. Voices lower around you, jokes disappear. People start choosing words more carefully, not because you demanded respect, but because they sensed it was required. They realize debating you is not about clever phrasing or loud confidence. It is about coherence. And coherence is rare. Here is the brutal truth. Most arguments are not about truth. They are about ego. You do not feed ego, you starve it. You stay focused on logic, consistency, and meaning. That is why people either disengage or self-destruct when they argue with you. There is nowhere to hide once the spotlight is on reasoning itself. You do not expose people by attacking them. You expose them by letting them talk. This is why the whispers about you include phrases like, "Do not debate them," or "they will pick it apart," or "they make you question your own position." You do not win arguments. You end them by removing the illusion that there was ever a solid case to begin with. You do not fight for dominance. You wait for clarity, and clarity always wins. That is what makes you dangerously intelligent. That is why you are not to be played with. Number 4. You do not move fast. You move when it is already over. Rushing is how people hand you the advantage without realizing it. This is another reason the whispers about you carry a nervous edge now. You do not rush decisions, and in a world addicted to speed, that alone makes you dangerous. While others move just to feel powerful, you wait to understand the rhythm of the situation. You do not confuse motion with progress. You do not confuse urgency with importance. And people who rely on pressure hate that about you. Here is what they miss. Your patience is not hesitation. It is surveillance. While they are acting emotionally, you are watching patterns form. You are noticing who talks too much, who panics early, who contradicts themselves once time stretches. You let situations breathe because time exposes truth faster than confrontation ever could. Imagine this. Everyone in the room jumps to grab a chair when the music stops. You do not move. You watch who shoves, who scrambles, who pretends they are calm while sweating. Then you calmly take the seat no one noticed was always reserved. That is how your decisions work. You do not fight over options. You wait until the real one reveals itself. People rush when they are afraid of losing control. You wait because you already have it. This drives impulsive people insane. They try to pressure you. Deadlines, ultimatums, emotional urgency. They want you to move before you are ready because that is the only way they can influence the outcome. But you do not bite. You let their impatience work against them. The faster they push, the more they expose their weak position. At this point, you might wonder why your calm seems to unsettle people so deeply. It is because patience removes leverage. When you do not react on their timeline, their tricks stop working. They cannot rush you into mistakes. They cannot force premature choices. They are stuck revealing more while you give nothing away. When you do not rush, the truth has nowhere to hide. By the time you finally act, it feels inevitable to everyone watching. No chaos, no scrambling, no second guessing. Just a clean, precise move that makes people wonder how long you saw it coming. The answer, longer than they think. That is why the whispers say you are not impulsive. You are calculated. You do not move early. You move last. And last is where outcomes are decided. That is what makes you impossible to play. And that is why they are careful now. Number 5. You do not remember everything. You remember what exposes people. You did not forget. You just did not react yet. This is where the whispers about you turn into quiet fear, because people eventually realize something unsettling. You do not carry useless details. You do not store noise. You do not get stuck replaying emotional drama the way others do. What you remember is what matters: patterns, contradictions, moments where masks slipped, things people assumed were buried because time passed and attention moved on. Here is the part that messes with them. You forget birthdays, small talk, and irrelevant chatter without effort. But you remember who lied when it counted. You remember who shifted their story. You remember who smiled while undermining you. That selective memory is not accidental. It is intelligence protecting itself from clutter. Weak minds remember everything. Strong minds remember what changes the outcome. Imagine this. Someone throws 100 words at you in a conversation hoping to overwhelm you. 98 of them are noise. 2 of them matter. You catch those 2 instantly. Or imagine someone making a subtle comment months ago thinking it dissolved into time. Everyone else forgot it ever happened. You did not. You stored it, not emotionally, but structurally, filed under character. This is why people feel uneasy around you later. They realize you did not get distracted, you did not react, you did not explode, you simply remembered. And memory paired with patience is lethal to people who rely on chaos. At this point, you might be asking yourself why people assume you forgot things so easily, because most people project their own weaknesses. They forget what matters, so they assume you did too. They rely on emotional fatigue, time gaps, and distraction to erase consequences that works on people who live in the moment. It does not work on you. Time does not erase behavior. It reveals whether it was real. You do not bring things up to shame people. You do not weaponize memory emotionally. You adjust access. You change positioning. You move differently. And when someone suddenly realizes they lost your trust or your openness, they do not even know which moment caused it. You do. That is enough. Imagine a security system that ignores background noise, but flags specific movements instantly. That is your mind, always on. Never overwhelmed, focused only on signals that indicate risk or truth. While others are trapped reliving emotional clutter, you are clear, grounded, and aware. This is why the whispers say you are hard to fool. You do not forget who people showed you they were, and once something is seen clearly, it cannot be unseen. You do not remember everything. You remember what exposes people, and that is exactly why you are not to be played with. The loudest boundary is silence that never breaks. This is where people finally understand they misjudged you, because you do not announce boundaries like threats. You do not explain yourself. You do not give speeches about respect. You do not argue about what crossed the line. You simply change access. And that quiet shift hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Most people think boundaries are words, statements, ultimatums. You know better. Words invite negotiation. Words invite testing. Consequences end the discussion. When someone crosses a line with you, they do not get a reaction. They get distance. Influence fades. Availability disappears. The door does not slam. It just stops opening. You do not get cut off. You get phased out. That is what unsettles people. There is no drama to fight against, no argument to win, no moment they can point to and say, this is where it went wrong. One day, they just realize something is different. You are colder, shorter, less reachable, less invested. And by the time they notice, the adjustment is already permanent. Imagine this. Someone keeps borrowing from a bank that never raises its voice. No warnings, no threats. Just one day, the credit line is gone. No explanation needed. Or imagine a building with invisible security. You do not see guards. You do not hear alarms. You just find certain doors no longer respond to you. That is how your boundaries work. Access is a privilege you revoke without announcement. You do not do this impulsively. That is what makes it powerful. Your boundaries are not emotional reactions. They are policies. You observe behavior over time. You notice patterns. You give people room to show who they are. When the line is crossed, the consequence is not explosive, it is final. And consistency is what makes it impossible to argue with. This is where a question might surface. Why do not you explain yourself? Why not give closure? Because explanations invite debate. Debate invites manipulation. You do not owe clarity to people who ignored it when it mattered. You let your actions communicate what your words never had to, and people learn quickly around you. Boundaries are not suggestions. They are operating rules. People respect rules they cannot bend. This is why the whispers about you include phrases like "once you are out, or "they do not play games," or "they do not warn you twice." You are not cruel, you are consistent. And consistency terrifies people who rely on second chances they have not earned. You do not announce boundaries because you do not need compliance. You need alignment. If someone cannot respect the unspoken structure around you, they do not belong close to you. Simple. Clean, final. That is not coldness. That is intelligence with discipline. And that is why you are not to be played with. Number 7. You see who they are before they admit it to themselves. You do not scare people by knowing facts. You scare them by knowing them. This is the point where the whispers about you turn personal. Because you do not just understand situations, you understand people. Not the version they present, the version they are still lying to themselves about. You see the gap between what they say and what they mean, between what they claim to want and what they keep choosing. And once that gap is visible, deception becomes almost impossible around you. Here is what separates you from everyone else. You do not listen only to words. You watch timing, hesitation, posture, emotional spikes. You notice when confidence appears too fast, when jokes arrive to cover discomfort, when anger shows up to protect insecurity. Most people miss these signals because they are busy performing. You are busy observing. People reveal their truth long before they speak it. Imagine this. Someone says they are calm, but their behavior speeds up. Someone says they do not care, but keeps circling the same topic. Someone claims certainty, but avoids direct answers. Others take these things at face value. You do not. You read the contradiction. And contradictions are where the real story lives. This is why people subtly adjust around you. They talk slower. They over-explain. They soften their tone, not consciously, instinctively. On some level, they feel seen, and being seen without control is deeply uncomfortable for people who survive on masks. At this point, you might wonder why people seem uneasy even when you have not said much. It is because you are reflecting them back to themselves. You do not accuse. You do not expose. You simply understand. And understanding removes their ability to manipulate the narrative. You do not expose lies. You make them unnecessary. Imagine a mirror that does not distort. No matter how someone poses, it shows the same image. That is what your presence feels like. People cannot pretend as easily. They cannot fake certainty. They cannot hide motivation behind performance around you. They either become more honest or more distant. Both reactions confirm your read. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people do not fully understand themselves. They act on fear they have not named. They chase validation. They deny needing. They sabotage without admitting why. You see all of that, not because you are judging, but because you are paying attention. And attention is rare. When someone understands you better than you understand yourself, you lose leverage. That is why deception feels risky around you, not because you will call it out, but because it will not work. You will adjust before the trap even forms. You will move differently. You will limit access. You will stop engaging where intentions are not clean, and the person will not even know what tipped you off. The whispers about you are not that you are intuitive. They are that you are accurate. You do not guess, you read. And once someone realizes you see beneath the surface, they know one thing for sure. They cannot play a role with you. They have to be real, or they have to leave. And that is exactly why they are careful now. Number 8. You do not need applause, and that terrifies them. When praise cannot control you, and criticism cannot touch you, you become unreachable. This is where the leverage completely disappears, because you do not seek validation, not praise, not approval, not permission. And once people realize that, they lose the main tool they use to steer others. You are not motivated by being liked, and you are not shaken by being disliked. That emotional independence is rare, and it makes people uneasy in ways they cannot explain. Most people are predictable because they are hungry for recognition, hungry for reassurance, hungry to be seen as good, smart, important, or right. You are not. You do not perform for claps. You do not shrink for comfort. You do not over-explain to be understood. That removes the hooks others rely on to pull reactions out of you. You cannot be manipulated if you are not auditioning. Think about it. Compliments slide off you because you already know your value. Criticism does not land because you have already assessed yourself honestly. There is no emotional gap for others to exploit, no neediness to poke, no insecurity to inflate or attack. People sense this fast, and it changes how they treat you. Imagine someone trying to bribe a locked door with praise, or trying to insult a wall into collapsing. That is what interacting with you feels like for people who depend on emotional leverage. They push buttons that do not exist. They try to provoke reactions that never come. And the absence of reaction tells them something unsettling. You are not playing the same game. At this point, a question might surface in your mind. Why does this make people respect me and fear me at the same time? Because validation seeking makes people predictable. Emotional immunity makes you opaque. When someone cannot tell whether approval or disapproval will move you, they do not know how to approach you. They become cautious, measured, careful, not because you have demanded it, but because it is required. Discipline is intimidating when it is quiet. You do not posture. You do not announce confidence. You do not fish for reassurance. You just move with control. That self-control signals something deeper. Stability, self-trust, authority without force. And authority without force is the kind that lasts. This is why the whispers about you do not say you are arrogant. They say you are solid, untouchable, hard to read. Not because you are cold, but because you are centered. People feel it when someone cannot be emotionally pushed or pulled. They either rise to that level or step back. You do not seek validation because you do not need permission to be who you are. And that is why you are not to be played with. Number 9. You do not feed the fire. You starve it to death. Chaos only works on people who reflect it back. This is one of the most unsettling traits people notice about you, even if they cannot name it. You do not mirror energy. You do not match aggression with aggression. You do not escalate tension just because someone brings it into the room. Instead, you neutralize it. Calm in, calm out, and that single habit dismantles entire manipulation strategies. Most people rely on emotional echo. They raise their voice to pull a reaction. They create urgency to force a mistake. They inject chaos to regain control. It works on almost everyone because emotions are contagious, but with you, the signal hits a wall. Nothing bounces back. No spike, no drama, just stillness. And stillness breaks their rhythm. If I do not react, your tactic dies in your hands. Imagine someone throwing a punch into fog. There is no resistance, no impact, no feedback. Or imagine a storm screaming into a canyon that absorbs sound instead of echoing it. That is what your presence does to chaotic people. They come in hot, expecting a response, and leave confused when nothing sticks. At this point, you might wonder why people seem deflated or disoriented after interacting with you. It is because their strategy failed silently. They do not get the emotional payoff they expected. No argument, no reaction, no leverage. And without leverage, influence evaporates. You do not win by overpowering energy. You win by refusing to host it. This is especially threatening to people who manipulate through pressure. When they cannot rush you, scare you, or provoke you, they lose their grip on the situation. They start talking more, explaining more, pushing harder. Each move exposing how dependent they were on your reaction. You simply stay grounded, and the imbalance grows. Imagine a thermostat that does not spike when the room heats up, or a body of water that stays still while stones sink to the bottom. You do not absorb chaos emotionally. You process it, strip it of power, and return calm. That calm is not passive. It is dominant. Control is not loud. It is steady. This is why the whispers around you get sharper. People say things like, they do not react, or nothing rattles them, or you cannot get a rise out of them. Those are not observations, they are warnings. Because once reactions fail, manipulation has nowhere to go. You do not neutralize energy to appear superior. You do it because clarity requires calm. And calm is the one thing chaos cannot survive. That is why they feel smaller around you. That is why the noise dies. And that is why you are not to be played with. Number 10. You do not see conversations. You see control grids. What feels casual to them feels calculated to you. You see power dynamics everywhere because your mind does not accept randomness. Tone pauses, who speaks first, who interrupts, who waits, who defers. None of it slips past you. While others hear words, you feel structure, who holds influence, who is posturing, who is nervous, who is trying to climb without being obvious about it. To you, every interaction has weight, whether people admit it or not. Most people think power looks loud, authority, titles, volume. You know better. Real power is subtle. It shows up in who people look at before answering. Who sets the pace? Who does not rush to speak? You notice these things instinctively without effort. And that awareness quietly rewires every interaction you are part of. The room tells the truth before anyone opens their mouth. Imagine walking into a room and sensing immediately who actually runs things, even if someone else is talking. Or noticing how someone's confidence drops when a certain person enters, or how a joke lands differently depending on who hears it. Others brush these moments off as vibes. You read them as data. This is why people tread carefully around you without knowing why. You do not challenge power directly. You acknowledge it accurately. And accuracy is threatening to people who rely on illusion. When someone realizes you see the hierarchy clearly, they instinctively adjust. They soften, they hesitate, they measure themselves. When someone knows where power really sits, games stop working. You do not weaponize this awareness. You do not expose it. You simply move accordingly. You speak when it matters. You stay quiet when silence holds leverage. And because your behavior aligns with the real structure of the room, people feel it. Something about you feels grounded, hard to shake, hard to manipulate. That is why the whispers about you do not say you are dominant. They say you are aware, and awareness is the kind of power no one wants turned on them. That is why they are careful now. That is why you are not to be played with. Number 11, you never show your whole hand, and that is why they keep losing. The moment you reveal everything you know, you give away your advantage. This is where the whispers about you turn sharp, uneasy, and quiet, because people start to realize something that bothers them deeply. They have never actually seen your full intelligence. Not once. You reveal only what is necessary for the moment, just enough to function, just enough to move things forward, never enough to be mapped, predicted, or boxed in. Most people overshare their thinking. They explain too much. They show their logic step by step, hoping to be understood or admired. You do not do that. You leave gaps on purpose. And gaps are dangerous because they invite assumptions. While others are busy miscalculating you, you are watching them expose themselves. What you do not say teaches people more than what you do. Imagine a chess player who only shows basic moves early on. Nothing fancy, nothing threatening. The opponent relaxes, they start taking risks. Then later, when the board tightens, they realize too late they never understood who they were playing. That is how you operate. You do not impress early. You let outcomes speak late. At this point, a question might surface. Why does holding back make people uncomfortable? Because unpredictability breaks control. When someone cannot tell how smart you really are, they cannot plan around you. They do not know whether they are ahead or behind. They do not know if they have been underestimated or studied. And uncertainty is stressful to people who rely on certainty to feel powerful. You do not confuse people by being complex. You confuse them by being incomplete on purpose. You also understand something most do not. Intelligence alone is not enough. Raw intelligence is messy. It jumps. It overreaches. Discipline is what sharpens it. And that is where you separate yourself. Your thoughts, actions, and timing align. You do not just think well, you move well, you speak well, you wait well. Imagine a blade that is sharp but never swung wildly, or a machine that runs quietly but never breaks rhythm. That is you, controlled, measured, aligned. People sense it, even if they cannot explain it. Something about you feels inevitable. When intelligence becomes consistent, it stops being impressive and starts being feared. This is why the whispers about you do not say you are brilliant. They say you are dangerous, not because you dominate, but because you are disciplined. You do not reveal everything. You do not rush. You do not leak intent, and that restraint forces everyone else to adjust. They speak carefully. They move cautiously. They assume there is more beneath the surface, because there is. You never show full intelligence because you do not need to. You let discipline turn it into power, and power, when it is quiet and consistent, does not need to announce itself. If you made it this far, understand something clearly. This was not entertainment. This was recognition. The whispers about you exist for a reason, and now you know exactly why. You are not loud, not reckless, not easy to read, and definitely not someone to play with. And the more you move like this, the clearer it becomes to everyone watching. So press the like button if this message matched what you have been feeling but could not explain. And if you are not part of this family yet, press subscribe. Stay close. This is where sharp minds gather and where noise finally loses its power.